Dr. Goldberg right after the break at the bottom of the hour. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Goldberg. He graduated from Southern Connecticut State College in June of 1970, earned a BA degree in biology and chemistry, attended the University of Maryland School of Dentistry, receiving his Doctor of Dental Surgery degree May of 1974. Upon completion of a general practice residency program in dentistry, he set up both a general dental and hypnosis practice in Baltimore, where he practiced until 1989. Dr. Goldberg moved his hypnotherapy practice to Los Angeles in 1989 and then retired from dentistry at that point. In 1984, Dr. Goldberg received an MS degree in counseling psychology from Loyola College. The American Society of Clinical Hypnosis trained Dr. Goldberg in the techniques and clinical applications of hypnosis in January of 1975. This organization trains only licensed dentists, physicians, and psychologists in the use of hypnosis. Dr. Goldberg has appeared on a lot of television and radio shows throughout the country. He's conducted live past life regressions on Donahue, Oprah, Joan Rivers, Regis, Kathy Lee, and other CNN stations. Through lectures, television and radio appearances, and newspaper articles, including interviews in Time and the Washington Post, he's been able to educate many people as to the benefits of hypnosis. He's conducted more than 30,000 past life regressions and future life progressions since 1975, and none of his patients have ever been harmed through the use of these techniques. In addition, Dr. Goldberg distributes cassette tapes to teach people self-hypnosis and to guide them into past and future lives. Dr. Goldberg gives lectures and seminars on hypnosis and regression and progression therapy as well. He is also a consultant to corporations, attorneys, and the local network media. So if you've ever wondered whether you lived before and may live again, this is going to be an evening you're not going to want to miss. He just had a CBS movie entitled The Search for Grace. I know he's proud of it. He should be. I saw it. It was a wonderful movie. Dr. Goldberg is next.
From the Kingdom of Nye, this is Dreamland with Art Bell on the CBC Radio Network.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm still, that report from Linda Howe is still resonating within my brain. That was really something. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is going to talk to us about lives, past lives, future lives. The foreword to his book, by the way, is by Raymond Moody, Dr. Moody, who has been a guest here any number of times. And this is an area of particular fascination for me, as many of you know. So now to Dr. Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg, are you there?
I certainly am here. It's a pleasure to reincarnate with you.
Oh, yes, reincarnate with us.
This is what they call in football a three-peat.
That's right. Look, a lot of people, even though we warned them and promoted your movie, don't know about Search for Grace, The Search for Grace. Tell them about your movie and about that case, Doctor.
Well, one of the criticisms that not only my work but my colleagues have had over the years is that even though the clinical cases are very dramatic and very impressive, and of course that's my main purpose, people come to my Los Angeles office not to document lives but to solve clinical issues. But they say, well, why? But can you prove it? Can you substantiate with evidence? And what I did was I had a case that was approached to me by a producer who wanted to do a movie for CBS, and I said, okay. So I went to my files, and there was a patient of mine that I work with on the East Coast who I regressed her into 46 lives, and number 46 was a life that she lived in Buffalo, New York, as a woman who was, shall we say, a very disturbed woman, if you will, a woman who was unhappily married. And she was having numerous affairs on her husband, and finally she met up with the wrong guy at the wrong time, and he murdered her on May 17th, 1927, in Buffalo. Her name was Grace Doze, and she gave me about 36 facts in trance, which were very specific, including her last name, where she lived, her maiden name, her husband's occupation, where he worked, etc. And I did initial research just to check on the validity of this. And, of course, the newspapers report murders for the last couple hundred years or so. You'll always read about some, even if you're a Jane Doe. And, in fact, they did have this case where the name was checked out and a few facts were checked out. So I then just did the initial research, and then I turned it over to CBS themselves, and they had an independent researcher verify the other material. As it turned out, out of about the 3 dozen facts she gave, not only were every one of them verified, with the exception of 2. 2 of the facts that she gave were in dispute, which, of course, was a problem but not a big problem. And the 2 facts were she said that she was 32 years old when she was murdered, and she was not looking forward to her 33rd birthday, and that her son's name was Cliff. Now, the newspaper report said she was 30 years old, and they said that her son's name was Chester Jr., Chester being her husband's first name. As it turned out, doing the research, now, New York being a closed state, you cannot just go into the Department of Public Health records and look up a birth certificate as you can in California and probably can in Nevada. What you have to do is you have to go to the governor's office, and you have to fill out a requisition slip, and you have to go through a big bureaucracy. CBS got that permission, of course, with no problem. As it turned out, in 65 years, 1927 to 1992, the only entity, meaning a person or corporation or any other specific situation, to request and to get permission to get into the records was CBS News in 1992. And as it turned out, she was right and the reporters were wrong. She was born on January 21st, 1895. She was 32 years old. Her son's name was Clifford C. Doze. And the only way she could have known that is one of 2 ways. Either she was, in fact, the reincarnation of Grace Doze, which is what I feel she is, or somehow she accessed her soul. Either way, it establishes reincarnation, or at least a life after death, or a permanence of the soul.
All right, how do we know, Doctor? Dr. John Mack was on our show a couple of weeks ago, and he was set up by a lady, and she got him. I don't know if you're familiar with that story or not.
No.
Dr. John Mack was set up. A lady came and told him a story, and he made it part of his book, one of many case studies, and she came back later and said, ha, 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 it was a setup. I set you up. None of this really happened.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, how can you know for sure that she did not research this lady's life and get the facts?
Because the only way, she was not a member of the family. Okay, that's a given. She was from a totally different part of the country. And even if she did research the facts, you see, I'll accept that premise. The problem here is that this is now one of the most documented cases of the century. It's even better than the Bridie Murphy case because now we have the real, we call her Ivy, is not her real name, but that's what I call her. If she did research the facts, she would have given all the information that was in the newspaper reports, including the false data of her age and her son's name. She could not possibly have known that. In fact, I tell you, I had an interesting confrontation. I was doing an interview of the day before the movie. The movie aired May 17th, and on May 16th, I was interviewed on WGR Radio in Buffalo, which is a 50,000 watt station, which I've worked with for about 12 years or so. I've done interviews on and off over the years.
Right.
And the host of the show, who's an old friend of mine, his name is Tom Barrowly, you may know him. And Tom says, I did some research, doctor, and I have a person on the line I want you to speak to. And I said, sure. Now, what he said was that the Department of Public Health said that for $10, anybody can walk in there and get the birth certificate of anyone, including Governor Cuomo.
Right.
Right? And I said, really? I said, let me speak to the person, using my L.A. law cross-examination best. Okay?
Right.
And I spoke to the gentleman, was a very nice gentleman. He's a supervisor, and he said that, excuse me, but doctor, I think before you even asked me any questions, that there's been an error here. You see, Mr. Barrowly spoke to one of my employees in reference to that, and my employee gave him the wrong information. You see, I am the supervisor, and any request for birth certificate goes to my office before they're released. Nobody, Jesus Christ couldn't get a birth certificate without having a family member, being a family member, or having an absolute permission granted. There's nobody that can get in here without a request filled out, signed in triplicate, and filed in the Department of Public Health.
Right.
So what he did was totally validate the idea that she could not have possibly known. There's no way she could have known it. Not only that, but Grace Doze, what people don't know unless they read the new book, is that this is a woman whose family disowned her. I mean, there's no pictures of her. There's legal records of her marriage and her birth and her death certificate, of course, but there's no, this is not the person that people, talk about at Thanksgiving dinner. This is a woman who was just ostracized, if you will. So there's no way that it's physically impossible for her without getting into the Department of Health records, unless she did a James Bond routine, There's no way she could have possibly gotten that information, and that makes it extremely very valuable, especially those two facts. So now in John Mack's case, I don't know about that case, but I'll tell you one thing. I guarantee I can tell you the source. The source is most likely an organization called SissyCop based in Buffalo, New York, by a man named Paul Kurtz, a name I'm sure you probably know. He's a parapsychological debunker who would like to use magicians to set up people. But this woman, not only do I know she was not set up because of that, but here's another interesting fact. Here is a woman who she refused all interviews. I'm like her agent here. She refused to go on. All the panel shows wanted to do interviews with her, and in fact, people now want to do. In fact, major magazines and newspapers want to do interviews with her. She refuses any and all publicity.
It's another good measure.
Yeah, and again, she also, by the way, another thing too is here's another interesting measure. People always talk about the finances. You know, I always like to get down to the old greenbacks.
Yeah.
And this is not gold coins, but American dollars. But what they said to me was that, well, what about the right fees? Well, Ivy, or the real Ivy, signed over the rights to me. She did not get a cent from this. In fact, her advice to me was, prior to me dealing with CBS, she said, I want you, Dr. Goldberg, to get the message out in only the way you know how to do, which means, of course, using the media for education and getting the point across, as I am, well known to do. So here's a woman who got nothing out of this. Zero. I mean, nothing. No one knows who she is except for me. And in fact, I'll show you another validation, which is kind of indirect. I got a call from an attorney in Buffalo, New York, who called me about a few days after the movie aired. The granddaughters of Greystones, who are alive, they're in their baby boomers, if you will. They had to contact an attorney to contact me. They want to meet the real Ivy because they obviously believe that she is the reincarnation of their grandmother. And so, I mean, here is an attorney and 4 granddaughters, one of which who looks exactly like the real Greystones, have already contacted me trying to get me to hook up with the real Ivy. So, I mean, there's so much information coming up here. There's so many things that are happening that are just, there's nothing to disavow it. There's everything to support it. And like I say, what is her benefit? She has nothing to gain by it. So, I mean, this is something that the research itself was very properly done, and it was done by an independent organization, not by me. And therefore, I mean, there's no way to disavow it. So, I mean, this is not going to be a reincarnation of what Dr. John Mack went through.
All right. Doctor, I want to understand what launched you into this whole search in the first place. In other words, how did you get from dental retirement, to where you are now? What launched you into this search to find out about reincarnation? Okay.
First, when you mention retirement from dentistry, which is true, although I do malpractice consulting, you have to understand your listeners who who do not know me. I am a very young retired dentist. When I was going to college in the late 60s and dental school in the early 70s, 70 to 74, in the 60s, I was not interested in watching plays or the movie like Hair. I had no interest in reincarnation. I was a very straight biochemistry student at Southern Connecticut State College in New Haven. So I had no interest whatsoever in any form of metaphysics until about 1972, when I took an astrology course. I started reading about astrology, and then I read the Bridie Murphy case. Maury Bernstein subsequently has become a very good friend.
Yes.
But I read the Bridie Murphy case, and I found that as a scientist and clinician, I found that extremely interesting. And I think, I want to test this hypothesis. In dental school, I decided I wanted to use hypnosis for pain control and apprehension control, which is very important. It's an excellent use for dentistry, and I used it for 13 years in my dental practice. However, I wanted to test the hypothesis. While I was a resident being trained in Florida, I took a course by the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, which, by the way, does not believe in nor in any way accept the concept of reincarnation. I mean, they're a very hard-line, very conservative, very straight-laced, and if not reactionary group. And so I sure didn't get my stimulation from them.
I see.
And the very first patient I decided to test this on was a friend of mine. She was a graduate student at Florida State University in social work, and she went into 9 different lives, which I thought was interesting.
Well, now, wait a minute. You said you decided to test it on one of your patients. What made you, was it the earlier research you had done? I mean, what culminated in, hey, I know hypnosis, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to see if there's anything to it? That must have been quite a step.
Actually, it really wasn't. I'll tell you why. That wasn't such a big quantum leap. The quantum leap was deciding to do the hypnosis for dental purposes and to use it in my practice, which is what the American Society trained me to use it for. While I was being trained, one of the psychiatrists who was training me, he said to me, he says, you know, doctor, he says, you're a young doctor, and I was just right out of dental school, and he said, you know, most people take this course for the CE units, and they go home, and they put a plaque on the wall, and they talk to their grandchildren about it later on, but no one ever uses it. Very few of us ever use it. He says, you are very talented, you've got a great voice and technique, and you're very assertive, and you've got a lot of characteristics here that are ideal, so I want you to just know that from my perspective, I want you to use this in your practice. And I said, you know, I drove hundreds of miles to take this class, and I didn't do it just to impress my wall with my other degrees. I said, I intend to use this very fully. So that was a very nice compliment.
Yes.
When I got back, though, so testing the hypothesis, you don't just read about hypnosis, you have to do it. It's a very clinical and very hands-on approach, if you will. So using hypnosis on this was not really a patient, she was a friend of mine, a colleague, if you will, later on. She simply said, look, if you're going to do hypnosis, why don't you do it with me? I think this is kind of fun. I'd like to try it. Just, you know, it's relaxing. It's automatically a positive thing to do. So I think the worst I could do is just learn a few techniques, and, you know, if I fail, whatever, it's a friend of mine. It's no harm, no foul, as they say.
I would think anybody who would volunteer for it would automatically be considered to be a good prospect, wouldn't they?
Well, she was open-minded. What I didn't know until later on, until after working with her, was that she was a somnambule, which is the relatively rare kind of person, about 1 in 20, who can actually go into a very deep level of trance, speak foreign languages fluently in trance, and even give enough information for complete validation. But that really wasn't my interest at the time. I didn't perceive at that time. I didn't do a progression and focus on me doing a documented case on CBS in 1974. As it turned out, she went into these 9 different lives. And what was interesting was that while I was working with her, I wasn't doing anything therapeutic, at least purposely. I was just using experiments, techniques, and asking questions and finding out how to deepen the trance level and doing some of the things that we do in hypnosis. She had 2 habits and a phobia that I wasn't even aware of. She was a smoker, but a very infrequent one. She had a bulimic habit, which is an eating disorder, which, of course, is easy to hide if you don't live with the person or don't know them that well. And then she also had a fear of water, which I didn't know because we used to go to the beach, and she would never go into water. But, you know, a lot of women don't like to do it because of skin issues or whatever. They just, you know, like to suntan themselves. But she was afraid of the water. As a result of going through these regressions, she overcame each of those 3 issues. And I wasn't even trying to work with her. I never gave her any direct suggestions or any techniques. She just, by going through the experience and by going through what I didn't know at that time was a technique I was later to document and develop called the superconscious mind type, which we'll talk about, was able to actually help her to raise her own soul's energy and rise above the issue, like the immune system, if you will, and was able to permanently, I mean, I knew her for about 13 years, or 12 or 13 years later. She eventually moved up to the East Coast, and I knew her professionally as she was with colleagues. So here's a woman who overcame these issues very, very extremely. So that really got me into the idea that, you know, this deserves more attention. I immediately developed a part-time practice. Even before I developed my full-time, my dental practice, I was actually a resident at the time. And when I moved back to Baltimore to open my dental office, I practiced dentistry only 2 years full-time and hypnotherapy part-time. Within 2 years, hypnotherapy was now my full-time practice, and dentistry was about 10 hours a week. So really, it was a very intense dedication and commitment very early to hypnotherapy.
All right, something I really want to ask you about. It's that moment. In other words, you may have heard, read, done research about people with prior lives and all the rest of it, but I doubt that it can compare to getting your first subject under and that moment when you realize you have led them into another life. It must have raised the hair on the back of your neck.
Well, it did. What happened was that, what happened first in dealing with my colleague here, she went to, the life that she went through the first was a life in which she drowned on board a ship in about the early 1700s. And she went through the death experience, including the suffocation and everything that the helplessness and the hopelessness of drowning, what it means, which is not something that people, you know, would want to think of how to spend a nice Sunday evening. And that experience, which was very emotional, but of course perfectly safe, at the same time, when I saw the intensity, this is a woman who was, you know, I knew her. She was a very bright, very quick mind, very global, very open-minded person. But here's a woman who is not an actress. She wasn't a theater major. She was a social work major. And here she was going through these contortions, these intense things. Yes. And I said, boy, if this isn't real, then, you know, I'm gonna eat my proverbial hat. And as it turned out, this was very critical in an immediate relief of that particular phobia, which again I didn't know existed. And within about 3 or 4 days, when I saw her next, she was swimming in the ocean, not just watching it. And that was to me extremely impressive. I said, boy, this is like when the student is ready, the teacher will be there, and necessity is the mother of the proverbial invention.
So in other words, you helped her get back on the horse and ride again.
Basically, I like to think of myself as not really solving people's problems or curing people, but simply training them to do it themselves. And what I did with her was train her to access literally her higher self, which we'll talk about, and she was able to overcome these issues really mostly by herself, just needed a little what I call karmic tweak, as I call it. But the effect upon me was dramatic in the sense that I said to myself, whoa, this is like the light bulb going over your head, or
exactly.
This is the thing that said to myself, I'm going to now devote more time to this, I'm going to check this out, and I'm going to do more and more of it. She referred a lot of her classmates to me and other people that she knew in town. This was Tallahassee, Florida, which was Florida State University is like one of the major industries in town, if you will. And so I had an instant practice, and I had a lot of experience and a lot of people to work with, and it just got more and more interesting and more therapeutic.
All right. Well, that's how it all happened. Hold on, Doctor. We'll be right back to you. My guest is Dr. Bruce Goldberg. He'll be back in a second. Do you have hard water? I certainly did. I have well water. Really good water, as a matter of fact, except it was hard, as well water would be. And it does a lot of predictable things, decreases water pressure as it clogs your pipes. I don't know what you'd call it, junk, and it'll put spots on your glassware. You'll know you have it if you have that. Poor sudsing of soap and shampoo in the shower. You already know about all that. So if you have hard water, you know about it. It's scaling is what it's really called. Out at the end of the water pipe, I had a lot of it, and or at least some of it, and when they put this on, they said, look, in a few days it's going to start falling off, and sure enough, it did. I would never have advertised this had I not first used it. Then the scaling in the pipes broke out, too, and then my water began to clear, and when it did, it was fantastic. And it is. This water is better for your skin, hair, food, clothes, appliances, car, pool, spas, whatever you've got that uses water. It's all done with space-age magnetic technology. That's GMX. It's a magnetic water conditioning system. It's about $400 for the average residence. Comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. If it does not do what we say it does, you get your money back. Simple as that. Call toll-free 1-800-400-1999. That's 1-800-400-1999. And now the Seacrane Company and the DL Digital Telephone. I spend a lot of time on the telephone, folks. Half my life, it seems. And so, of course, a portable telephone is just the ticket for me, except I couldn't stand normal portable telephones. Your neighbors interfere. You get hum, click, disconnect. You know how they sound. I get them here on the air. You know how they sound, usually real hummy and wishy. It does happen to us. Past lives, future lives. Are there rules to reincarnation? Is everybody reincarnated? What's the deal?
Well, the deal is actually more fully explained. I'll summarize it for you. But in my older book, Past Lives, Future Lives, the Ballantine publication, there's a chapter where I talk about what happens in between lives and how you choose your next life. And
right.
In fact, there are techniques and tapes that are available that people can actually go through that experience. I call that the superconscious and the soul plane. We can talk about that later, too. But basically what happens is that when the soul, you have to understand, the soul is equivalent to this radio signal. This radio signal is electromagnetic radiation. Television signal is also the same kind of radiation. It's
correct.
Harmless radiation.
Yes.
All right? And your soul is, and we've proven this scientifically over many years, this soul is, in fact, electromagnetic radiation. We can photograph it. We can weigh it. We can prove it exists automatically.
Wait a minute. You're running too fast. We can weigh the soul?
Well, interesting. There was a man named McDougall in the early part of the century who did a study where he had people on these, they had, of course, signed permission for this. He had these on these very large analytical balances. When I was studying chemistry, we used to use these very fine balances to measure very small weights of matter,
sure.
solids.
Sure.
Well, he had a gigantic version of these analytical balances, and what he did was he had people who were about to die, and they give him permission to allow them to weigh them while they were dying. And what happened was that at the moment of death, upon the expiration, and of course they were hooked up with various machines to show when they actually physically crossed the spirit, as we call it, or clinically died.
Yes.
There was about a 3/4 of an ounce difference in the weight.
Oh my.
And that was actually quite a reliable study.
I've heard of this, and so you're telling me that was a real study.
Oh yeah. McDougall was a very, very qualified man.
Well, what happened to that data?
Well, the data's around. Just that the study was done about 1913, so science of today, nobody has decided to replicate that recently that I know of.
Why not?
Well, you have to understand we're dealing with a litigious society, and how many people? It's hard enough to get bodies, cadavers for medical school, let alone people to put themselves on balance.
Right? Would you lie here while you die, please?
I don't think you're going to see too many ads in the paper. Please sign up and call this number 1-800-DEAD.
How many? Do you know how many individuals were involved in that study?
I really don't. I read the original study years ago, about 20 years ago. But it was a study that was done. I believe it was done in Duke, but I'll have to double check. Anyway, it was a real bona fide study, and it can be searched.
That's incredible. All right, we're at the top of the hour, so I've got to pause here. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is my guest. Past lives, future lives. That, incidentally, title of a book he's also written. We'll be back.
From the Kingdom of Nye, you're hearing Dreamland with Art Bell. To participate in the program, call toll-free 1-800-618-8255. 1-800-618-8255. First-time callers, area code 702-727-1222. Or the wildcard line at 702-727-1295. This is the CBC Radio Network.
Good evening to all you 3/4 of an ounce types. Maybe some with a little. I wonder if it varies around. Some have more soul than others. There's a question to ask. We'll get back to Dr. Goldberg and ask it in just a moment.
Yes, we were talking about the idea of the in-between life state, and I was referring to the idea that the soul or the subconscious mind, which is identical to a radio or TV signal, meaning electromagnetic radiation.
Exactly.
In neurology or medicine, we refer to this as the alpha brainwave level, which has been documented since the early 50s. Well, as it turns out, what happens is that there is a rather standard scenario that occurs during the in-between life experience. But first, let me just go back to the scientific aspect of this. We can weigh the soul to approximately 3/4 of an ounce, as was done in the early 1900s. We can photograph it. Kirlian photography, developed by the Russian researcher Kirlian in the early 40s, shows that you can take it's the human aura or the soul that you can actually photograph.
All right, I have a question about that. What is Kirlian photography actually taking a picture of? In other words, I can imagine that a human body would have an aura of thermal energy around it, or even some kind of very weak electromagnetic energy. What is it photographing?
What you're actually photographing is the actual soul, because what goes on here is that the thermodynamic energy you're referring to, such as our 98.6 body temperature, would not emanate very far off the body.
No, it would not.
Photography shows that when the animal, human or lower animal or even plant, is excited, there's a dramatic increase in the aura around the body. You can't do that with thermodynamic or with the electromagnetic, like the gravity around the Earth doesn't change very much,
All right, then my question is, what force, well, you're going to say the force of the soul, what force is it actually measuring? Scientifically, it's got to be seeing something we can measure.
Electromagnetic radiation is what it's measuring. That's the bottom line.
Electromagnetic radiation.
But there's no transformer pumping up the voltage. It's not becoming a 100,000 watt signal from 50,000 watts.
Yeah.
See, the body doesn't change that much.
And so then what permutations in the aura are you able to observe?
Well, I mean, you have to understand, when they take these photographs, the photograph is a photograph. We don't know the exactness of what they're getting. It is definitely the representation of our aura or our electromagnetic field around our body. But the point is that it does violate most of the physical laws that we're trained in physiology.
Right. I've just never understood, clearly in photography, what kind of special process is being used. What kind of photograph? Not just regular...
Well, we're going to have to reincarnate the late Dr. Kirlian to find out, because I've never done the procedure. I've just seen the photographs.
All right.
But basically, what we say, we can photograph it, we can weigh it, we can observe the phenomena via automatic lighting, as other indirect ways of perceiving the presence of a soul. So we know that the soul, there's no question. I mean, that is not even a debate anymore. It hasn't been for many decades.
For some people, Doctor, it is.
It is, but not for scientists, okay?
All right.
The lay public say, there's a Flat Earth Society, too, but I'm not a member, I don't have a card. Anyway, so the presence of the soul is important because it does actually show that there is a life after death. And, of course, things like the documented cases and other things that we can do just only add to the data. What happens in between lives is very interesting. You mentioned a very dear friend and a very qualified man, Ray Moody, who, of course, termed the term near-death experience in 1975 in his book, Life After Life. Well, as it turns out, his experience of the core experience of a near-death experience is very similar to what happens when the person actually does die in a past life. What they do is they do go through the tunnel, if you will. Most of them do. There's a variation, but there's a core experience there. They do have the presence of light and colors and sometimes sounds. They do have the presence of a guardian angel, if you will, a loved entity. It might be an image of a Christ or another religious leader. It might be an image of a grandparent or some other person that they've known who's on the other side. They do have this feeling of empowerment, of peace, of freedom from physical, whatever they were suffering from, whether it be a heart attack or a spear in the chest, whatever it may be. And, of course, they're always perfectly safe when they do this. Now, what happens in between the mechanism now?
Well, again, I want to stop you for a second. I saw a couple of physicians. I think it was, it was CBS or some network recently did something on the near-death experience.
Okay.
They had physicians who came on presenting the other side, saying, look, the brain has synapses. As the brain dies, it dies from the outside, rushing toward the center, so we are not surprised that people who are dying see a bright white light that gets smaller and smaller and more intense as the outer portions of the brain die. Right. How would you counter that?
Well, I would counter it very simply, and I will counter it not only with the work of Ray Moody, but also with a very good colleague and a mutual friend of ours, Dr. Kenneth Ring from the University of Connecticut, who wrote a book in 1980 which no one seems to have ever heard of called Life or Death. It's a great book, but it's very technical. What happens here is that, you see, what Dr. Ring reported, and Dr. Moody didn't really report this that much until later on. Ring was the one who really focused on the idea of precognitions as a characteristic of near-death experience.
Okay.
What happened was that Dr. Ring would report in his book and subsequent books afterwards that people would have these premonitions of future events, and they were documented. They logged them in little computers, and they kept registries of these. And these people would not only perceive them at the corner of a room where they would see the dials of what their blood pressure was when they were having a near-death experience, which, of course, they can't see when you're lying on a slab in an OR, but they also would report their cousin getting in a car accident 3 weeks hence, and things like that were actually documented. Now, I know the woman. It was a woman that was on this network special. I saw it myself, and I understand her callousness and her mentality, but she also has a reputation of being very hard-nosed anti-parapsychology. So you have to understand there's no such thing as an objective opinion. What you can't describe, though, what you can't explain, she was dealing with the neurophysiology, of which I have a background, and I understand what she was saying, but she can't explain the precognition, or what I call progression, in past lives, future lives, where these events actually come true. They do not come true when people are out of this near-death experience in the normal waking state. We're not talking about psychics or sensitives or people who have that experience. We're talking about only people who've had this experience as a result of the near-death experience.
Okay.
See, so therefore, that gives, again, indirect but very substantial evidence. Anyway, they go through, there are various different procedures. Everybody has their own mentality. For example, in Past Lives, Future Lives, I described a talk show host from Baltimore, who's now in New York, Harry Martin, who's now at WABC TV in New York, who went to this, dome experience where he would choose his next life. He was in, a dome experience and almost the equivalent of a network headquarters where you'd have monitors showing all your past lives, your future options, and then he would have his masters and guides, his higher self would be there, his departed relatives, but he had all kinds of advice as to what to choose in his next life. Other people might report being on the Himalaya mountaintops, or whatever you feel comfortable is what you're given, but there is an in-between life state where you are accessing what we call your higher self, which, as you'll see, is very important for the therapeutic components of what I do.
All right, I've got to touch on it. Religion is going to mix into all of this for a lot of people, and so I would ask you, is there any report that these people give of a review, a judgment of any sort with regard to the life just lived?
You know, it's very interesting. That question has come up in the past, and I'll tell you, I don't know anybody in the world that has the experience I have of doing over 30,000 regressions on 10,000 individual people in 20 years. And I have never had that. I've never had anybody ever report to me what you're calling the judgment or the judgment day, if you will. What they get is a very objective overview of what they've done, and not focusing in on their faults, but simply, okay, now this is what you've done, and this is what needs to be done, and this is what your options are, and what do you want to do?
That's a kind of a judgment, though, isn't it?
Not really. A judgment to me is when you are bad, evil, you go to hell, you go to heaven, you go to purgatory. That's judgment.
Well, but maybe we are, in the end, required to, in effect, judge ourselves.
Well, you could always say, judge ye not, lest ye be judged. But what I'm saying here is that there isn't the idea of somebody, some white-bearded, white-sheeted person with pointing fingers, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's a very objective, very beautiful, peaceful, ethereal experience that's described in various different forms. But that seems to be the bottom line, where you have this overview. It's what I call a global assessment. And this is done from what we call the soul plane. I described the various plane concepts in past lives, future lives, for those of you listening that are interested in more detail. And this is basically gotten from metaphysical literature. But basically, they're on a different dimension, if you will, where there are no physical laws as we know it. Anytime you leave the earth plane, even in a near-death experience, assuming that you're going to what we call the astral plane or the next highest plane, there are no physical laws as we know it. In fact, you're in the space-time continuum, which means that past, present, and future are all simultaneous, which is more fully explained in the new book, The Search for Grace, which is just hot off the presses, published by In-Print Publishing, and is just out now. And what I'm trying to say, you have a way of where you have the choice. It's not like what people say, I have bad karma, so that's why I've done what I've done. That's what I call the karmic cop-out, or the excusitis, as I call it. And to me, that I will always confront, as you know me, I'm not exactly a shy person. And I will always say, look, you choose this. You may have made some mistakes, or maybe you didn't follow the path that you wanted to do, but you can always correct it. There are very few things in life that you really can correct. In fact, quantum physics, which is the basis of this field, says that our thoughts create the reality. Therefore, the only thing that we know of in the universe, we're not even sure of this, is there's only one mind out there, and that is your mind, or my mind, or your listener's mind. We don't know there's any other mind out there. We don't know what else even exists in reality, but we do know that our thoughts do create a reality. In fact...
All right, a quick technical question about this plane. When you're on this plane, I take it you have a kind of consciousness, and your consciousness is a product of the life just lived, and you retain that until the moment you make your choice about the next?
You actually retain, not only do you retain the life of which you just lived, but you also, this is what we call your ultimate consciousness, which is, by the way, a constant in quantum physics equations. That's how scientific it is. You have a consciousness and an awareness of all your past lives, all your future lives, all your parallel frequencies, and all the possible combinations and permutations for you to select from. It is a global menu.
Wow.
See, so this is why there's no excusitis accepted. Now, people can always deny things and use their defense mechanisms as people are wont to do. But the point of my therapy is to get people beyond the defense mechanisms.
Doctor, while you're on that plane, it seems to me that almost, for some people, might be considered to be an eternal hell. That is, sentenced to live life after life after life after life after
Well, actually,
life.
You have the right point, but the wrong term. The eternal hell that people would describe. See, really, this is going to offend certain people, and I'm not running for office. Basically, according to my research and my experience, and again, it is voluminous, the hell that we talk about, or people have related to, is really the earth plane. What you're living in right now is the hell. There's nothing below the earth plane, no matter how you slice it. I've never had any evidence of anything below the earth plane.
Put another way, this is as bad as it gets.
Right, as bad as you allow it to be. You see, you can always improve things. I mean, I have dramatic cases that are reported in both books. I mean, Ivy, here's a woman, let's just deal with Ivy for a moment. The real Ivy was murdered by the same man 20 times in 46 lives. He tried to murder her on 3 different occasions in her current life, and had she not have gone through this experience, she probably would be belly up or face down in her 21st experience of being killed by this man that we call Johnny in this life and Jake in the 1927 Buffalo life. So here's a woman who was constantly, the hell was simply being murdered by this guy, the victimization and the karmic retribution, if you will, of not learning the lesson of finally standing up to your rights and getting on with your life and removing this obsession, obsessive compulsive disorder is what we call it, and to rise above this. And that was really the whole point of the book. See, The Search for Grace book, the reason why that is very different from Past Lives, Future Lives, is because The Search for Grace, not only is it a documented case that's fully documented, but it also reads as a non-fiction murder mystery. You know, the Buffalo Police Department today consider the Grace Doe's case an unsolved murder. And I had a very nice conversation with a man named Sandy Constantino, who was the Tonawanda where she was actually murdered, the chief of detectives. And he, at least he was in 1992, and he said to me, he says, well, doctor, we know who the murderer was. He's a history aficionado. And I said, Sandy, you know who it is? Go ahead, who is it? knowing police mentality, since I'm a forensic consultant, I knew he would assume it would be the husband. And I said, well, that's very good, Sandy. The problem was that Chester Doze had a broken leg the day of the murder, which, of course, was reported in the newspapers. And he said, yeah. And I said, plus, he also didn't drive a car. He was also illiterate. So, therefore, he must have, unless he rented a cab and said, excuse me, cab driver, take me to this place where I can murder my wife and then bring me home and help me get through the door on my crutches, it wasn't the husband. He said, well, I guess you're right, so who was it? And I said, well, you can't try a man for a past life murder, so don't worry about the actual real murderer. But,
well, all right, through your assistance, has Grace been murdered for the last time?
Yes. The real Ivy now, this is now 6 years after this regression was done. And by the way, some interesting things have come up here. She, by the way, is in a very healthy relationship. She broke off the relationship with the man we call Johnny, or at least he was called Johnny in both the book and the movie. And she's very, very healthy. She's a very young woman, actually, but very, very bright, a professionally trained woman, and she's going on with life very happy. She loved the movie. She loved the new book, and she's a very totally empowered person who you wouldn't even literally recognize from her behavior now as to when I saw her 6 years ago. But the interesting thing about this case, though, again, it reads as a non-fiction murder mystery that, of course, was solved. It's also showing the principle of synchronicity, which is very well tuned throughout the entire book, which is the Jungian concept that says there are no coincidences. And what was synchronistic about this case was not only the fact that she was hooked up with me, but that CBS, the network itself, was actually introduced us indirectly, including the writer of the movie, over a 10-year period of time that I wasn't aware until long after the fact. So it was a very, very kind of unusual circumstance that led us to all get together, where not only she was able to resolve her issues, but also this was able to be dramatized in a relatively accurate form on May 17th. By the way, for the benefit of your listeners, if they saw the movie, the 11 o'clock news after the movie did show me on a little clip showing an actual regression in one of my other patients, and some of your listeners may have also seen me on the Jerry Springer show that was aired in January, where he was taken into both a past and future life. In his past life, he shared a life where he was actually helped by his current life daughter, so there was a karmic tie with his past life experience in medieval England. But again, the point of all this is that this is a case where you have karmic ties, relationships. We know each other in past lives. We know the significant people in our lives. Victimization, which is always the issue I deal with. The idea of relationship ties, of empowerment, of overcoming issues. It doesn't matter what the issue is, as long as it's humanly possible and the patient is motivated, anything can be accomplished. And by the way, another theological reference here. In the movie, the very end of the movie, they showed the real Grace Doze being buried, and the marker on her grave said, "Ye shall be born again," which was a really not quite exact quote from John chapter 3, verse 7. The real quote is, "Ye must be born again." And on May 15th, 1994, 2 days prior to the airing of the movie, Alex Ayers, the writer, and myself placed a marker on the real Grace Doze's grave, which was unmarked for 65 years, and in fact, that is there now. The movie was also aired synchronistically and not with intent. The network didn't do it for that reason. It was aired exactly 67 years to the day from her death.
Wow. And
not only that, but it aired to the hour because she was killed, murdered, apparently, according to the coroner's report, at approximately 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the movie was aired between 9 and 11 p.m. on May 17th of this year, so it was to the exact moment that she died.
Okay, I'm curious. What has the reaction to the movie been like? Have you had a lot of people coming forward to you saying, oh, my God, this is what I need. I need to talk to Dr. Goldberg. I need to get this or that worked out. What's the reaction been like?
Well, the reaction has been unbelievably positive. I mean, I'm even surprised, and I've been a television consultant for 15 years. When you're on the 11 o'clock news nationwide, you're going to get a variety of responses. All right? Now, what I got was my secretary has not logged in any calls of people saying, you're a jerk, I hate you, goodbye, or, you're the devil reincarnate. I haven't gotten any of those, but most of those people wouldn't call me anyway. But what I've gotten was a vociferous response of very, very nice people who, of course, wanted therapy and wanted experiences. But what's very interesting about this is that this is what I want to talk about now for a few minutes. What I said on the news, this is a 3-minute clip that went nationwide. I know you saw it in Las Vegas.
Yes.
What happened was I discussed, if you can call the news clip, I discussed accessing the higher self, the superconscious mind level, perceiving the soul's awareness, perceiving into past and future lives, being able to change your future by empowerment. And what people responded to, as lovely as they were, and was so appreciative, and this is one of the reasons why I did it, was that they said, you know, doctor, I've never in my entire life ever watched the 11 o'clock news and had somebody talk about the superconscious mind on the 11 o'clock news. And they just never got it before. I mean, you know, it just never came, especially from a credible source. And therefore, that was one of the main effects people got. Even those that, of course, many of them had their experiences and came to see me. I'm still getting lots of referrals from that. But what they said was that we really appreciate you having the guts to say that, having that aired, and being willing to take that stand, fearing, you know, knowing that of the potential response. The response was all positive. I mean, and I knew it would be, but the point was that I have a certain karmic purpose or subcycle in this life of education. And I do not believe in education by shall we say, by eggshellness. I believe in education by confrontation and by doing whatever has to be done. And the network was kind enough to, they edited, of course, it down, but they left the sound bites in and the key points. So it was a very nice response and very appreciated. Even people who didn't come to see me just called in, and I had calls from all over the country. People said, you know, I can't come to Los Angeles to see you, but you know, doctor, keep up the good work, and I'm really glad you did what you did.
Well, it's wonderful. All of this begs all kinds of questions to me about the nature of time itself, the nature of time. Is there anything you can say about that?
Sure. As a matter of fact, in past lives, future lives, you understand, when I was dealing with Valentine, they didn't want me to devote too much time to the technical aspects of quantum physics, fearing that it would turn off the public.
Sure.
So I had to wait until the new book. The Search for Grace has 3 appendices in the back. Appendix C has an actual self-hypnotic exercise, but Appendix A and B will give the complete background of how this therapy works, what we call transpersonal psychology. It will also tie in the space-time continuum in quantum physics.
Yes.
And it will give it to examples, diagrams, and it's very simply written so that you don't have to be a physicist or a scientist to understand it. What we're saying here...
All right, hold it. We'll tackle this when we come back. We've got a bottom of the hour break right now. Dr. Bruce Goldberg is my guest. His book, his latest book, The Search for Grace, was recently a CBS movie. I hope you had an opportunity to see it. We will be opening the telephone lines and taking questions for Dr. Goldberg. So if you're of a mind to ask one, put your dial-in finger to the telephone and get going. Coming up shortly.
The Kingdom of Nye. We continue with your calls on Dreamland with Art Bell. Call Art now, toll free at 1-800-618-8255. 1-800-618-TALK. First time callers, area code 702-727-1222. 702-727-1222. Or the wildcard line at area code 702-727-1295. 727-1295 in the 702 area code. Now again, here's Art Bell.
From the high desert, this is Dreamland. Good evening, everybody. I am Art Bell. My guest is Dr. Bruce Goldberg, and we're going to get back to him and more about past and future lives and the nature of time in just a moment. First, though, we've got a sponsor called Absolutely Fresh Flowers. All they do is sell flowers to the American public directly from a flower farm. The net result of that is you get the best deal in flowers that anybody gets anywhere, anytime, period. It's the best deal on flowers in the United States of America. Quite a claim, huh? I make it. There's no question about it. It's miniature carnations they sell, beautiful flowers, and you get such a gigantic shipment that the person on the other end just goes bonkers whenever they get them. And you get a telephone call saying, why'd you spend all that money on flowers? You can either say, look, I'll tell you the truth. It was just $39.95, including delivery, or you can keep your mouth shut and just say something like, well, you're worth every penny. That's what I usually recommend. But that's up to you. That's the price. Delivery anywhere in the contiguous United States for $39.95. You can't beat it. Absolutely Fresh Flowers. Call them right now or 24 hours a day for exactly that kind of impact at 1-800-562-6438. That's 1-800-562-6438. Absolutely Fresh Flowers. Do you have hard water? I did. Hard water that produced such effects as clogged water pipes, water heater inefficiency, decreased water pressure, spots on all the glassware, poor sudsing of soap and shampoo. These aggravations plagued my water until I discovered the ultimate practical solution called the Gmx Fluid Conditioner. What is it? Well, it's installed in my home, and now I swear by it. Think of it this way. The U.S. Bureau of Standards reports that just 3/8 of an inch of buildup in scale in your water heater requires 55% more energy. On average, that's $247 more a year you've got to pay just for hot water. GMX removes the gunk from the water, which makes it better for your skin, hair, food, clothes, appliances, car, pools, and spas. But here's the kicker. It's all done with space-age magnetic technology. Magnetics! GMX uses no salt, no chemicals, no maintenance required, is environmentally friendly, retains healthy minerals, can be moved if you move, and comes with a lifetime warranty. Lifetime. Technology originally developed for the NASA space program. You'll be absolutely amazed at what it can do for you. The cost is only $400, and it comes with a 90-day money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, you get your money back. Can't lose. Call toll-free 1-800-400-1999. Once more, 1-800-400-1999 between 8 in the morning and 5 in the afternoon Mountain Time. Write it down and call this number, 1-800-400-1999. All right, back now to our guest, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, and I was asking him a little bit about the nature of time. After all, if we come back in a succession of lives, both in the past and then into the future, it would certainly suggest, or it seems to me as you follow this, it would begin to suggest something about the nature of time itself. What about it, Doctor?
Well, what the quantum physicists state, and actually prove both mathematically and experimentally, is that all time is simultaneous and functions in a continuum. So there really is no beginning and no end. Past, present, and future events are really occurring all at the same time. The analogy that I use in both Past Lives, Future Lives, and The Search for Grace is a simple one of a helicopter. If you're listening to the radio and during the early morning and you're driving on the freeway or highway where you live, and you hear this helicopter reports about the traffic patterns. If you are in this car and there's a helicopter directly above you by 200 feet, and you have a CB, and the helicopter has a CB, so you're a karmic good buddy here.
Yeah.
And then there's a car 5 miles behind you where you just came from, and 5 miles ahead of you where you're going to. You can't see a car 5 miles in front or behind you on the freeway or highway. It's just too far. But the helicopter, because it's 200 feet above the freeway, can perceive all three cars simultaneously, which means your past, present, and future. It can also communicate with these cars because it has a CB, and all these three cars have CBs. And what's interesting is that when you go into an alpha level, natural hypnosis, which is really a natural state that we go through 3 to 4 hours of our waking day, every time you daydream, every time you watch television, read a book, driving in a car, by the way, 25% of the time it's documented you're in alpha or hypnosis. When you go into your REM cycle, the dream levels at night, which, as you'll see, is when basically all the therapy actually occurs, that's another 3 hours a night. So you're spending about 6 to 7 hours a day in a 24-hour day, or 2,500 hours a year for every year of your life going through natural hypnosis, which is why it doesn't feel particularly unusual.
All right, so that I may understand, then, time is just something we had to invent.
Well, time is only a concept that, of course, it's a label, just like you label anything else. But what I'm saying here is that, using the concept of quantum physics and what I just described, when you enter into a hypnotic level, you actually are doing automatically an out-of-body experience. You don't have to go to the corner of the room and observe and watch the silver cord. You actually are leaving your body every time you enter a daydream level. When you leave the body, you are now entering what I call the freeway of life here. And you are really now being the helicopter rather than the car, and therefore you are now able to go either back or forward in time. And since our thoughts, and this is where physics and mathematics really go together very well, since our thoughts go faster than the speed of light, we call that in physics a tachyon. Going faster than the speed of light means that you're going in reverse time sequence. So mathematics and physics, conventional, not just quantum physics, but even conventional physics has proven that we can actually be a time machine and go back and forward in time. So therefore, all our past and future and present and future lives are occurring right now. We just label it for our own convenience, but we are not really accurate. We are on the Earth plane, but not when you leave the Earth plane, and therefore using hypnosis, what you're doing is an out-of-body experience, which means you're now leaving the earth plane, entering into either the astral plane or anywhere up to the soul plane, and able to perceive your past, present, and future.
All right, we've got to get to telephones here, but here's a question came in by fax. I've got a lot of them. Please, 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 ask your guest if God is just a mathematical equation.
No, actually what God is very interesting. This is something that is going to both disappoint and thrill some of your listeners. Well, you can pray, you can go through all kinds of mentalities and rituals all you want to. You will never contact God by doing that, because God has no conception to the lower five planes or the karmic cycle. What God is not a mathematical constant. It's actually the energy that we have a remnant of. Our superconscious mind, which is a clinical term, and it's actually provable, by the way, it's demonstrable. Our superconscious mind, or what your listeners would known in the literature as the higher self, is actually a remnant of the God energy. The only time you're ever going to meet the God energy is when you are perfect, when you ascend into the higher planes and go to either whatever you believe in, whether it be the 13th plane, the all that is, nameless plane. There's all kinds of names for it. Those are all man-made, if you will. But yes, is a God. God is energy, and energy is the basis of the universe. The Big Bang Theory, which I, by the way, buy as a concept until proven otherwise, says that the universe began as a pencil point full of energy that exploded. It was energy, not matter, that preceded. In fact, the basis of the universe is energy, nothing else. So the God energy is nothing but a perfect form of that energy, of which we have a remnant of, and therefore, yes, there is hope and salvation. And not only that, but I've done progressions. I developed the field of progression hypnotherapy in 1977 when I asked the patient to go to the origin of a problem, and she decided to go into the 23rd century rather than back in time, as I suspected she would. And I've taken patients as far forward as the 36th century, and that is documented in past lives, future lives. And so, yes, there is going to be quite a future for us, for human forms and different planets.
It seems to me you'd be in a position to do a little, what would appear to be prophecy. I mean, can you tell us what's coming?
Well, now, see, interesting. The answer is yes, but no. I am not going to prophesize about anything, because what I try to demonstrate more so in the search for grace now, rather than past life, future life, which I didn't really have that much time to do it there, is that there are not just one future, but there are parallel universes out there. So to make it simple, even though there's an infinite number of parallel dimensions, which was, by the way, demonstrated in Princeton University in 1957 by a man named Hugh Everett III, who received his PhD in quantum mechanics, which is the actual technical name of quantum physics, in Princeton, and Princeton is not exactly a matchbook university.
Right.
It was mapped out by Martin Kruskal, his supervisor, during the next few years, but we've demonstrated parallel universes for 37 years. Now, what this shows is that, let's say, to keep it simple, from experience of doing this for 17 years, you and I and everybody out there has at least 5 major groupings of different futures. We call them frequencies. Let's say frequencies 1 through 5. And let's say that you are on frequency 1 right now, but your best frequency is number 4. If you were then to perceive all 5 frequencies, which is what I do in my Los Angeles office, and by the way, your listeners can do that via tapes, which I'll talk about later, then you can switch tracks and go to number 4. So if I were to give you some scenario and say, well, in 1999 this is going to happen, that will happen on a certain frequency, but not necessarily the one in which you are on.
Oh, that's fascinating. Let me tell you why that's fascinating. I've had a lot of people who do prophecy, and most of them say, Doctor, this is a future. It does not have to be this way, or there are alternatives to it. And almost to the person, they always say that. And that kind of coincides with what you're saying about the way it...
What they're doing is they're reading books like mine and books by Fritz Copper and books by Fred Allen Wolf and books on quantum mechanics, and what they're doing is being very educated. I'm glad you had that experience, because I don't. Most of the people that I have known and I have checked out, I feel like the reincarnation of Houdini half the time, but most of the psychics and channelers and mediums that I've checked out, especially in Southern California, have, shall we say, not weathered well with the test, and they have tried to become very... well, this is the future, I see it, and that's it, and everything, and they don't really get it. So I'm glad to see there's another end of the spectrum. But yes, there's always what we call a plastic future, which I described in the back of the Search for Grace as in Appendix A. And what I'm saying here is that, and this is not me, but the quantum physicists saying that there are alters. So therefore, somebody who wants to give a prophecy, which is when you see shows like recently Encounters on Fox and the Ancient Prophets on NBC, when they showed about how the world's going to end or you're going to have major catastrophes in the next 5 years.
Earth changes.
It's absolute garbage. It's quoted by Casey in the Bible and Nostradamus, and they're welcome to their opinion, and that's a parallel frequency, but it's not the one that I'm on, folks, and if you're on my frequency, you're not, you're going to be able to live in California without swimming.
All right, look, we've got to get to the telephones. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Dr. Bruce Goldberg. Hi. Hello there. Boy, ring, and then they're not there. On the wild card line, you're on the air with Dr. Goldberg. Hello.
Hi, this is Jim and Chico. Listen to K-Pay.
Yes, Jim.
Years ago, I had a encounter with a ghost. What are those exactly?
Well, the ghosts or poltergeists are actually astral bodies. When you die or clinically cross into spirit, as the term that we use, you now become a less material form of a body that we call an astral body. So what you're getting are the different planes. In that astral dimension or astral plane, there are no physicals as we know. So now what you see is a body that actually represents the space-time continuum. That's right. What people call ghosts.
Doctor, while we're on the subject of ghosts, I've got some pictures of ghosts. The doggonest thing I've ever seen. I consider them to be legitimate. Mm-hmm. One partially materialized, and another of a group of people in period dress, taken recently, mostly materialized. They'll stand the hair on the back of your head up. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, ghost photography was actually developed by such people as Hans Holzer about 30 years ago, and I've known some people on the East Coast who do that. There's also something called electronic voice phenomena, where you can have a regular tape recorder and go by a cemetery or even an older house that's been around, say, for 50, 60 years, and you can actually get voices of people of ghosts or poltergeists that are actually living in that house. So this is a phenomenon that's very well documented. And in fact, I've seen some of the photos. I know Hans Holzer. I've seen some of the photos myself, and yes, they will raise the hair on the back of your neck.
Yes.
And they are. What's even more significant are the apparitions that are perceived. There's a woman who died in Chicago by this cemetery or by this large gated house, and she appears every so often, X number of years. There are many stories of that, many well documented, also that have been documented by TV cameras as well as by Polaroid films, which you can't, fudge real well if you know the UFO literature.
That's right.
I'm referring to Gulf Breeze and other cases. So therefore, these are very impressive evidence. What's most impressive, though...
All right, I am going to... Listen, Doctor, I'm going to get you copies of some very impressive photographs, clear 35-millimeter photographs.
I would absolutely love to see them.
All right, good. On the toll-free line, you're on the air with Dr. Bruce Goldberg. Where are you calling from, please?
I'm calling from Oregon.
Oregon, yes, sir. Go ahead. Turn your radio off.
Turn my radio off.
Turn your radio off.
It's off.
All right, go ahead. You're on the air. No? You're going to go ahead, sir, or should I move on to another call?
No, I'm on.
All right, go.
I want to tell you, my father died soon after I had an opportunity to go to England, and my father appeared to me. I did not dare open my eyes, but he was there, and he said, you've already been a nice guy, just take care of your mother. And I was, like I said, I was afraid to open my eyes, but he was there.
Were you very close with your father?
Yes.
Because, you see, I'll tell you why I asked that, because a poltergeist or someone who's recently crossed into spirit will usually communicate only with one member of the family. They may communicate with others, but they usually pick the person they feel closest to relay their last messages or their advice or their presence that they are going on to a bigger place. And obviously he chose you rather than your mother. Did she have this experience?
No, he's not there now.
He's not there. But probably didn't, so he probably chose him. So this is very common. People, one of the things I deal with in my Los Angeles office here are bereavement issues. A lot of my patients are middle-aged people who have teenage sons or daughters who either were killed or murdered or died by accident, or parents or loved ones, grandparents, and they can't get over the bereavement, which has depression and many other characteristics. Not only can they do that by accessing them in their superconscious level, but they can also perceive future lives with them, so that they...
So then is the plane kind of like jail, where you're allowed to make one phone call?
Well, it's not quite. You have more than one phone call, and I wouldn't like to consider a jail, which is a confinement. It's sort of like a place, and it's not a purgatory either.
I'm being a little flippant.
I know, but your listeners out there, unfortunately, they've been brainwashed to think of it as in forms of that, and that's what I'm trying to clear up. It's really a very open place where whatever you're dying from, if you're suffering from a disease, illness, pain, you are totally free from it. It's a very ethereal, beautiful, like a library in the sky, if you will. So, but the communication, you'll find that these communications that people receive from these spirits, if you will, or poltergeists, are really quite positive and very beautiful. They're not like desperate. Sometimes there is a difficulty in a traumatic death which has to be worked out. And one of the techniques which I'd like to deal with more here is the idea of what we call a superconscious mind level, where the patient is trained to access their own higher self. Not only can they perceive their own past and future lives, but they can also access departed loved ones. They can access their own guides and be instructed as to how they can help empower themselves and to go on with their life and to accomplish goals and do many other things, as well as seeing future events.
Haven't you ever wondered, though, Doctor, whether it's something we really ought to be doing, in other words, accessing this higher self?